James Carville, during the 1992 presidential election, coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." 33 years later in BC and Canada, it's the economy, stupid. British Columbia's economy is fragile. We've been in a period of modest growth, but we're now about to turn into an economic storm. The provincial budget deficit is projected to be close to $11 billion. And now with the canceling of the carbon tax, the government will forego another $3 billion in revenue. Add in Trump's on again, off again, some on, some off, tariffs windstorm, the stress on the BC economy is compounding. Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it. Our panel tonight digs into the reality, the challenges, and what we can do. Our panelists are Jock Finlayson of the Independent Contractors Business Association, David Williams of the Business Council of British Columbia, and Robert Hogue of RBC, who is joining us virtually from Toronto. Robert, thank you for joining us. I know it's a little bit later for you than it is for us here on the West Coast. So welcome to Conversations Live. Tonight we come to you from Kemkemale, the land of many maples. These are the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. Osiem. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series that seeks to advance our understanding of the big issues of our times. Our goal is to share ideas that help each of us gain a greater understanding of our communities, our province, our country. We also endeavor to raise awareness for not-for-profit organizations that make a difference in our communities. Tonight, I'd like to draw your attention to JA British Columbia. For the past 70 years, JABC has been providing programs to youth across the province with a strong focus on financial literacy, something that is desperately needed. These programs help young people build the knowledge and confidence to dream big and take control of their future with an understanding of the financial and technical skills they'll need along the way. If you're in a position to support JABC, I encourage you to reach out and ask how you can help. You'll see the banner, and there's some pamphlets here in the room if you're in a position to help them. There are many organizations, though, that help us to host Conversations Live. And we're only able to bring these events to you in person and live online thanks to the organizations that support programming for engaged citizens. You'll see their names and logos of the organizations scroll across the bottom of the screen throughout the evening. But I can't thank them enough, and so I'm going to take a moment to name each one of them out loud. Our hosting sponsor this evening is Macmillan LLP, and our other hosting sponsors are RBC and KPMG. Our annual sponsors are Fortis BC, BD Developments, Stem Cell Technologies, Digital, Rennie & Co., Polygon, Landlord BC, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, Helijet, TC Energy, TELUS, and Marquee Wines, which are contributing gift certificates to our panelists this evening. Robert, I don't know that the wine gift certificate is going to do you any good because it's only available here in Vancouver, but we'll send you one anyways. Our supporters are BCIT, Falkirk Consulting, the Goodman Report, and OPI. And we work in association with Mario Canseco of Research Co. Our media partner is the Vancouver Sun. Thank you very much. And our live streaming services are provided by Oh Boy Productions. As I say, without their generous support, this program would not be possible. One last little bit of business before we get started. For anyone wishing to submit a question, and I see already there are some coming in, be it from our in-person audience or online, please go to slido.com, enter the code Conversations Live, and send in your question. I'll receive your questions and share them with our panel where I can. That said, I may not deliver your question verbatim, but I'll be motivated, however, by your thoughts and ideas, and they'll help to shape my questions this evening. Our topic tonight is, it's the economy stupid. You know, Canada is the second largest country in land mass with a population density of just 4.2 people per square kilometer. That's just one more person per square kilometer than Mongolia. We're a country that is overflowing with natural resources that are in demand around the world. If we were to unleash the economic potential of this country, Canada should be the richest country on earth on a per capita GDP basis. And that matters because that's the money average people make. But we're not. And it's not the rest of the world that's slowing us down. We've done it ourselves. For more than 50 years, we've coasted, riding on the crest of the wave of abundant trade with the United States. Now that relationship is uncertain at best, in tatters at worst. Well, unsettling, it's a wake-up call. As Dave McKay, RBC CEO, pointed out, Canada has failed to seize opportunities for years because of tax policy, bureaucracy that slowed approvals for key projects, and at times, a lack of ambition to do some big things. Mr. McKay went on to say, but we have a chance that we can seize this moment as a country. Now here is Mario Canseco of Research Co., whom we asked to conduct a poll on how and what we think about the state of the economy in BC and Canada. RF, can you roll that video, please?
More than 2/3 of Canadians and 7 in 10 BC residents believe that the economic conditions in the country are poor or very poor right now, while fewer than 3 in 10 consider them very good or good. Our views on personal finances are better, with just under half of Canadians and BC residents saying that their current situation is good or very good. Still, almost 1 in 5 Canadians and BC residents believe that their own household is clearly not doing well at this time. British Columbians are more likely to foresee a worsening financial situation for the country than Canadians. Almost half of BC residents expect the national economy to decline, compared to the national average of 43%. While just over 3 in 10 Canadians and BC residents anticipate no changes in the national economy, only 11% of British Columbians believe the situation will improve. Political activity is moving the numbers on inflation in Canada and British Columbia. While more than 7 in 10 Canadians and BC residents think grocery prices will continue to climb, the numbers are similar for new vehicles, a clear change precipitated by the specter of Donald Trump's presidency. Gasoline, which used to be near the top of this list, has fallen to the same level as real estate after the announced cancellation of the consumer carbon tax. Two issues are keeping Canadians and British Columbians awake at night: the safety of their savings and the value of their investments. More than half of respondents have worried frequently or occasionally about these two financial matters. It is important to note that BC residents are less likely to have worried about being able to make rent or mortgage payments than the Canadian average, and fewer than 2 in 5 are concerned about their employer running into serious financial trouble. In the middle of a federal election campaign, almost 3 in 5 Canadians express confidence in Mark Carney to do the right thing to help the economy, while 43% hold similar views on Pierre Poilievre. In BC, the gap is narrower, with just 5 points separating the level of confidence in the Prime Minister and the Conservative leader. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from Research Co.
Thank you, Mario. Jock, I want to start with you. I tended to be a little bit directed in my opening about I don't think things are what they could be. From your perspective, what's the economy look like here in British Columbia right now?
Well, it's at best mediocre, and although I would say the thing that's unfortunate about the return of Mr. Trump and the sort of 360 trade war that he's launched is Canada actually had a little bit of momentum in the fourth quarter of last year, and we did as well. The economy was picking up. I think that was really the effects of the lower interest rates the Bank of Canada engineered starting in the middle of last year. So forecasters, including ourselves, I think I can speak for David on this, were looking for a little bit of improvement in the economy in 2025 after a fairly lackluster 2024. That, of course, is all gone now because of what's happening in the broader environment. So what I would call the Trump shock is really weighing on Canada. We're obviously much more impacted than a lot of other American trading partners by not only the actions that the president's taken, but the ubiquitous uncertainty that attaches to everything about U.S. policy right now. So I think that's really hammering confidence, business confidence, consumer confidence. Bank of Canada's Business Outlook survey was out last week, which confirms it. Small business confidence is at a record low in Canada, and I'm sure that's true here as well. And we're beginning to see the job market really, really weaken. And a lot of companies, I think, that might have been looking at making investments next year are sort of sitting on their hands at the moment. By the way, the same thing's happening in the United States. It's not a made in Canada story because of the same, the tremendous uncertainty. So we're in a tough spot. And the sort of forward momentum that many of us were hoping for in 2025, I just don't think it's going to materialize. So we're going to have to muddle our way through. Maybe these trade issues will be resolved in a satisfactory manner. It's possible, or we could end up with a very different kind of outcome. So until we have some clarity around that, I think it's really difficult to know where things are going. But I'm confident saying that we're not in a good place as of the sort of beginning of the second quarter of 2025. That's at a minimum we can say that.
Robert, from your vantage point in Toronto, how do you see the state of the economy?
Right, I couldn't agree more with Jock here. I mean, it really is a kind of a lost opportunity, and totally agree that 2025 was supposed to be the year that the economy would start to pick up a little bit momentum, and that's largely because of this monetary policy easing, with now inflation that is down to close to target. And very unfortunately, this trade war now is basically adding huge layer of uncertainty, and absolutely we're seeing it across Canada. This is weighing on the big spending, investment, and spending we're seeing in the housing market as well. We got some data today that clearly demonstrate the last couple of months that there's a lot of wait and see out there. A lot of buyers who are not too keen to make a big lifetime financial decision at this point. We're seeing with businesses or just like just waiting for some kind of clarity, or just like weighing their options with respect to what their next move will be. The labor market, as Jock pointed out, that we saw some drop in employment in March. Now we'll see if that's just the start of a new trend. It could certainly, given all the other circumstances, it could be more or less a tipping point for the labor market. At the time that we're starting to show some early signs of improvement, like the unemployment rate in Canada had peaked in November. It kind of drifted a little bit lower, and we're starting to say to ourselves, hey, maybe we're just past the worst of it. So it's likely now that's going to pick up again, and it's going to fuel this loss of confidence that we have in the economy. So, at the end of the day, as involved in the forecasting exercise, it is very, very hard to have any conviction in any kind of base case scenario. There's a lot of possible outcomes for the economy. Now we could be sitting 6 months from now or 3 months from now, and the picture could be looking very different, either worse, or I would not rule out that the picture could look better. I mean, what we've seen in recent days and weeks is that Canada may no longer be the target of the Trump administration, and on a relative basis, we may turn out to look better now than we did up until not long ago, which could attenuate some of the pressures that we're seeing. Not saying this is going, no, we're about to get any full clarity on the entire kind of a trade policy space. But there might be going forward, and we might see a little bit more optimism starting to spring up over the coming weeks and months.
I hope that that's the case. But David, how did we wind up in a situation where we became so vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it's important to zoom out and look at where we've been over the past decade. And we've talked about this before. This has really been a lost decade for Canada's economy. Once you adjust for population growth, Canada's economy is almost the same size as it was a decade ago. There's been almost no growth in the economy. If you look at the composition of growth, there's been growth in the public sector. Public sector spending's increased. But on the private sector, the private sector economy has either stagnated or retreated. So household consumption spending has grown at only a third of the rate of government spending. It's been positive at least, but exports per capita, investment in residential dwellings per capita, and in particular business investment per capita is down about a quarter compared to where it was a decade ago. So that's business investment in machines, equipment, tools, technologies, business practices, software and the like. You can't have a higher standard of living as an economy if you're going to invest less than you did a decade ago on a per capita basis. That is just a recipe for lower living standards. And that shows up in the statistics that Mario put up before from the polling data. That shows up when you look at Food Bank's data. If you look at Food Bank's data, Food Banks Canada shows that we have 2.1 million people per month using food banks across Canada. That's up 90% compared to 2019. 1/3 of visits involve children, and children are only 17% of the population. So you don't have to even look at the economic data. You can see it in the polling data, you can see it in the Food Bank's data. So we've had this hollowing out of the private sector economy, and that's where the vibrancy comes from. There's only, the way productivity works, this is the key concept, is it's companies coming up with a new mousetrap, new ideas, new innovations, new technologies, and competing with each other for profit to try and come up with the best mousetrap, and then older companies being displaced by them. That's the process. But whenever you have a sclerotic private sector economy, that productivity growth slows down, and that's what we've seen. We've had productivity growth retreating for the last 3 years. We've had GDP per capita in full retreat for the last 2 years, and that's just going in. Now, what about BC? BC's been in a slightly better position. We have been the second strongest economy, I'll put inverted commas around that, over the last 5 years. We've been one of the best provinces. But that's the best of a bad bunch. We are historically weak. We're growing much weaker than we have on average compared to our historical average, but still good enough to beat the other provinces. So we're sort of the best of a bad bunch. So when we make these relative comparisons, we've got to be really careful. Historically weak, but better than most other provinces for one key reason, which are the major projects, the mega projects: Site C, Trans Mountain, Coastal GasLink, and LNG Canada. Enormous, once-in-a-generation projects that have boosted GDP in BC, but they're all done. So there's nothing really to replace them. And so we were in a position where BC's economy was going to look a lot more like the rest of Canada, which is not necessarily a good thing. And that's the position that we came into 2025 with, as we now face the external challenges of Mr. Trump, who I think is probably going to do for the global economy what Jack the Ripper did for late night shopping in East London.
I want to run a clip from an interview that I did last week with a fellow by the name of Daraj Goel. He's a venture capitalist with Get Fresh Ventures. And he talks about, we start ideas here, but the climate is challenging. Can you roll that video, please, Arif?
I've seen how startups have grown and been engineered in Canada, and also what's happened over those 35 years where these companies have left Canada, where top talent have left Canada. And that's because the opportunity here is so limited. If you talk to any founder, their immediate perspective is that if you want to raise money, real money, you got to go down south. The moment you do that, you got to set up a Delaware Corp, and before you know it, you're an American company. Mm-hmm. And that's the nature of the beast. 78% of our unicorns are in the US that were started here. So there's a reason why that happens. We should be one of the richest countries in the world. And that's funny, right? Because we have such an amazing educational system. We engineer really smart people. We've got so much ambition and so much desire to create. And also, we're really good at managing our life balance. But there's a constant exodus. There is just not that spark that you expect to see in such a nation in Canada today. There's less entrepreneurs today than there were 10 years ago even.
So what's happening, Jock? How come we continue to see this exodus? Because, David, you talk about the fact that we're seeing a hollowing out of the private sector, but the public sector continues to grow.
Well, look, I mean, what the speaker's referring to is not something that's just happened recently. I mean, there's kind of a long history in Canada where talent and ideas and innovation that might have been spawned here or developed here, often at heavy taxpayer support, by the way, we end up losing it to the U.S. And that's, I mean, we should not overlook the enormous pull factor of the United States. We're not alone. I mean, globally, maybe this will change in Trump 2.0, but historically the U.S. has been a magnet for global talent and innovation, and whether it's in science or engineering, entrepreneurship or finance. So it's not new, and we have experienced the impact of that through sort of steady out migration. I mean, I used to have a chart in my office or a file of all the BC-based technology companies, kind of up to about up to COVID, that had been founded here, established here, and ended up doing exactly what the gentleman's referring to. Over a period of time, they ended up relocating the sort of management and often the headquarters to the U.S., largely around access to capital was really the reason. So it's not new, and I mean, there's not really a solution to it, but we should be paying a lot more attention than we have been to the features of the entrepreneurial environment here. And where I would fault the federal government is I think it has been a lost decade for Canada, including in this area, simply because the political priorities have been elsewhere. The attention of cabinet ministers, the attention of the bureaucracy in Ottawa has not been focused on the problems the gentleman is referring to or what we're discussing here. It's been around social policy, climate change, reconciliation, a variety of other priorities. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but the economy has not, building the foundations of the Canadian economy has not been the priority of our political leaders in Ottawa in the last decade, nor in Victoria. And that's partly why we've ended up in a weak starting position to deal with whatever these external challenges are going to look like going forward.
You know, Robert, in my opening remarks where I was quoting Dave McKay, he talked about tax policy as being a part of it. And I think back to when Bill Morneau was the finance minister, there was really a targeted campaign to say that business people aren't paying their fair share. And there was this sense that if you're going to succeed, you're going to pay more and more. How important is it that tax policy starts to reflect an attitude that says, we want you to stay here, we want you to build that company, we want you to work with financial institutions in Canada to be able to bring prosperity and create jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge signal, right? When you tax like the success more or less disproportionately, you're not sending the right signals for further investment and further entrepreneurship in the economy, because this is what it's part of that creative destruction that well-functioning economies require. You need to risk taking, and that has to be justly rewarded. And clearly the signals have not been the proper ones over over a long period of time now to really, nurture this entrepreneurship in Canada and hopefully keep as many as possible. And the other point that Dave has made is about the length of time it takes to approve projects and just like the red tape and everything, how heavy the bureaucracy is to get things done in this country. And that's strongly discouraging a lot of that risk taking and big bet on Canada. And that really governments at all levels. I mean, this is not just the federal government or provincial governments, but even at I would argue at the city level as well. It's just like the burden that's imposed on businesses to just make something that will be positive for our economy and our Canadians. And so clearly, and I couldn't agree more that the focus has not been enough on the business side and being business friendly and to acknowledge the role that businesses play in our economy and allow them to flourish and make Canada a home and grow in Canada. And so there needs to be some adjustment in that respect.
So, David, just before I come to you, I want to play one more clip here because it speaks to something that you and I have talked about, the clogging up of the wheels of bureaucracy. Can you play this clip from an interview that I did with Gavin Dew before he was elected provincially? He had been leading an ag tech venture in the Fraser Valley, and they just ran out of patience. Arav?
So we partnered with the University of the Fraser Valley as our core academic partner. We built out a plan around a $50 million innovation hub. We worked very closely with them and supported some of the work that they were doing in order to try to create a place where innovators and entrepreneurs could come together for commercialization, education, innovation, all the things that will drive a more innovative food economy in BC. And we intended to wrap around that a complete community with a large amount of affordable housing, jobs, high quality education, all the things that everybody says they want. And in actual fact, we did opinion research 6 or 7 times over the course of 4 years. Where we ended up was that 93% of people in Abbotsford who had an opinion on the project were supportive, and virtually every stakeholder was on side. Every MLA from every party was on side. Everybody was saying, let's do this. Heck, half the city thought it was already approved and being built. But unfortunately, we just hit a point where we couldn't keep going in circles. I think it's a small story, but it's indicative of a bigger problem, which is that we found ourselves just going in circles. We would go into one process with the city where they would say, okay, the only way we can consider your concept is if you submit it through this neighborhood plan process. But then they'd ignore our input. And then we'd go, okay, so should we go in through an official community plan amendment? We'd go in through that process and we'd get railroaded. Then we'd go in through another process. And what I found so bizarre about the whole thing is that we got to the end of the process. This culminated in us telling staff, telling council, and telling them in writing before they went into a meeting, we can't keep going in circles. We need a really clear signal from you that you actually want this. And that doesn't mean you're going to sign the bottom of a blank piece of paper and say you can do whatever you want. It means we need you to come to the table to help shape and steer this to make sure it's going to be something that works for the community, that creates benefit for all of Abbotsford and all of the region. We just need you to come to the table. And unfortunately, they just couldn't seem to get their heads around it. So we showed up to a council meeting where councillors knew or should have known full well that the choice was either we're moving forward or we're not, and they voted for a staff recommendation that killed the project.
Killed the project. Gavin went on to say we become the land of the slow maybe. And I know that this speaks to something that frustrates you, David.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you do need a functioning government. You do need government regulation, but it's something that we almost celebrate to the nth degree. Like more regulation is always better. I'm reminded of the story of, speaking of taking bureaucracy to the nth degree, you think back to the Soviet Union, right? Everyone's very equal in their incomes, but only 1 in 7 people could afford a motor vehicle, and you used to have to wait. You had to go quite a process to to get a motor vehicle, you'd have to wait 10 years. And there's the famous story of the guy who walks into the place and he fills out all these forms, and the fellow who's in charge says, "All right, sir, you've done enough. You pay your money. Now come back in 10 years and collect your vehicle." And the customer said, "Morning or afternoon?" He said, "Well, sir, in 10 years' time, what difference does it make?" He said, "Well, the plumber's coming in the morning." And that really just demonstrates like the bureaucracy just suffocates entrepreneurial talent. And we've taken it too far. You see it with the business investment data, as I mentioned, it down by 26% on a per capita basis compared to a decade ago. If you look at Gavin's talking about the municipal bureaucracy, but at the provincial level, in the mid-2010s, we had about 6.5 bureaucrats. I'm not talking about education or health workers. I'm talking about public officials in the ministries. So we had 6.5 bureaucrats per 1,000 head of population in BC, and now we have 8.5 bureaucrats per 1,000 population. Now you would think with technology that we would get better at serving the population. You would think we'd become more efficient over time, but we've actually had a 26% increase in the number of bureaucrats that we need provincially to help govern British Columbia just in the last 10 years. So I think we need to remember that all of this has to be paid for, and it's all paid for by the private sector, and the private sector isn't doing very well, and that's not a recipe for rising living standards.
You know, there's a question here, Jock. What countries, provinces, states are an example that we could look to if we have the political will to start to make changes?
Yeah, before I answer that, David's comment reminds me of I have a business acquaintance who deals a lot with the Government of Canada in his business, Environment Canada, Fisheries and Oceans, and Transport Canada, and he said to me a couple of weeks ago, if your goal is immortality, put the federal government in charge of your demise. And you're very likely to be successful. You know what I would do, Stu? I would look at the jurisdictions that have been, frankly, outperforming us in some cases by a pretty wide margin in terms of investment, productivity, growth of incomes. And it's not just the U.S. It might be the Scandinavian, some of the European countries, Australia. And I would be looking at their tax systems, their regulatory systems, how their bureaucracies are structured, how people are incentivized. The kind of nature of their governments, their legislative frameworks, because whatever we're doing in this country, it ain't working right now. We are absolutely stagnant and have been for quite a while. And I don't hear a lot of debate in this federal election campaign, by the way, that's really getting at this.
Does that surprise you that it's not high on the agenda?
It actually does surprise me simply because we've done so poorly. I mean, if we were doing okay but not great, then maybe you would expect the political class to ignore these issues. But we're not. We're at the absolute bottom of the pack in terms of pure jurisdictions on a lot of these performance indicators, and have been for quite a few years. And the question is, what's going to change? Based on the election campaign, it's not clear to me that very much will. So we might have another decade of stagnation. So I would look at the places in the world, and I don't care whether they're more free market oriented or maybe a little bit more statist in their approach, because some of the Scandinavian countries actually have larger public sectors than we do, but they're much more effective and efficient in delivering services and getting things done. So I would be looking out at jurisdictions that we think are performing better, whoever they may be, democratic jurisdictions, and saying, whether it's environmental permitting, project assessment, the design of the business tax regime, how housing supply, is developed and comes to market at the local level, and try to learn from these other places, because we don't have the answers. It's clear, and we are declining in our performance and our rankings on virtually everything. So look outward, not inward. Look outward at the people who are doing better than we are, and see if we can borrow some of their ideas and adapt our institutions and policies to get a better outcome. That's the approach I would take. Because I think we're actually in a pretty dire situation, and we need to start looking out at those who are doing better and seeing what we can learn from them. Because I don't see that we're going to learn that much looking inside the country, frankly. We need to be looking out.
Robert, would you agree? And if you do, is part of the component of what we would be looking at would be jurisdictions where there is an embracing of business success, and where political leaders and maybe the general population go, yeah, we want to see businesses succeed.
The word that comes to mind is partnership, right? And as Jacques mentioned, there could be different approaches, more status or more free market. But at the end of the day, I think it has to be a partnership between the public sector, between government and businesses, and so in a very constructive manner to get things going, to reduce the bottlenecks, to get things going as quickly as possible. And for the greater good, so I think there has to be a change in culture in that respect, and it has to come the sooner the better. And I know that knowing many people in the business community, they're more than willing to talk and work with policymakers and regulators and government officials. And I think there has to be this kind of almost stigma at certain level that businesses may not be there in the best interest of all, and that stigma needs to be addressed, and the culture needs to change. That we need to be partners in this.
David, we've talked before about the fact that there are business people who want to make investments in British Columbia or in Canada, but they can't get in and speak to decision makers. Like, they're not even getting calls returned. How important is it there be a mindset change that says, yes, we welcome this kind of investment? But in my question, there's a little bit of a twist, because suddenly now we're looking at the pressure that Donald Trump is putting on the BC economy. Do you sense that is changing?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty optimistic that we're going to go through some changes in our public policy dialogue in Canada. I think we were right on the cusp of it in January, and I think that's kind of what contributed to the Prime Minister resigning. I think we were ready for that, but Donald Trump has really changed the conversation, and maybe, unfortunately, possibly postponed that conversation. But I do think it's coming. There are three things that I would put at the top of the list that we need to do. One is to get our fiscal house in order, because when you have a deficit that's careering down the track and getting larger and larger and larger, and debt servicing costs are getting larger and larger, that sends a really negative signal to businesses that taxes are going to be higher in the future. It also sends a negative signal to talent to say, don't stay here because taxes are going to be higher in the future, to try and stabilise our fiscal situation. That's the first thing. Number two, what is it that would allow you to base top talent, high-skilled workers, senior executives, head office staff in British Columbia? You've got to basically sell to them that they're going to make a lower market wage, pre-tax wage, because productivity is lower in the province, and they're going to pay the fourth highest top personal income tax rate of any of the North American provinces or states at 43.5 cents on the dollar. So any additional effort they make to upskill... 53, sorry, correct. 53.5. So any extra effort... Which is worse. Any extra effort that they make to up their skills and to earn a higher income or to work more hours, all of that goes away because the government is wanting to take more than half of any incremental dollar that you make. That makes it really hard to make the case to base senior staff of a business here. And you can't expand a business without senior staff. And then the third thing I would say is we have a really inefficient provincial sales tax regime. The GST is a very efficient tax because you get an input tax credit throughout the supply chain. One company sells to another and they get a credit for any GST that they paid. But the PST isn't like that. The provincial sales tax, you just keep paying it all the way through the supply chain, and the final customer might end up paying 70% tax on the product. Who knows? It's all embedded and it's not netted off. So as a result, BC is estimated to have the highest effective tax rate on new capital investment at about 25% in the province. Now that's just not an attractive proposition for companies. So sure, the pre-tax return might be fantastic, but then you've got to temper that by the post-tax cost that they're facing. So those three things are three things we could do fairly, immediately if we wanted to and had the political will to do it. And I think that would improve conditions in the province.
I have one more video clip that touches on some of the challenges that we face. I'll get you to comment on that, but then let's finish off with what are ways in which we can move forward. And hopefully policymakers and legislators will say, okay, maybe there is room here. But could you play that final clip for me, Ara, from Michael Goring?
Canada has a blessing of critical mineral resources, talent, infrastructure, many other very positive attributes. But right now, part of the challenge that we face is it takes too long and is too complex to get a mine permitted and authorized within a decent time frame. That scares away capital.
Is it really that we've created an air of uncertainty that, yes, you'll invest the time, the money, and you might get your permit?
Miners can take risks, are willing to take risks, but one of the challenges is when you are working through a regulatory system that is full of duplication, overlap, the people that have lent you the money to do that work only have so much patience, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why the Mining Association of BC and miners across Canada have been having conversations with their provincial governments and with the government of Canada to say, we need to roll up our sleeves and we need to make some changes, because the opportunity that is out there for Canadians in the mining space is huge.
It is, isn't it, Jock?
Yeah, what I would say on that, Canada's biggest comparative advantage, and this is even more true for BC, is in the natural resource economy. A lot of people don't like that. We have an urban population. A lot of people are, almost embarrassed, I think, that we're kind of a resource-based economy. But this is where our global comparative advantage is. And, more than half of Canada's exports come out of the resource economy. In BC's case, it's more than 70%. And when I hear our political leaders talk about diversification, a point they never make is that the real opportunities to diversify trade for Canada are primarily in the resource bucket. Our manufacturing exports are overwhelmingly directed at the United States, but our resource-based exports can actually serve global demand. So we need to kind of embrace that, and I think get away from this notion that we shouldn't be a resource-based economy. That's where our global comparative advantage is. And it's not just in critical minerals, it's right across energy, metals and mining generally, agri-food, and forestry. It's the full bucket, and that's doubly true for British Columbia. And I think our provincial policymakers are beginning to wake up to this a little bit, but it's late in the day, and we've lost a huge amount of ground. And frankly, our reputation, both in Canada and certainly in BC, is not very good in global capital markets, around the corporate boardrooms, in the investment funds, in the site locating consulting firms. We've become a tough sell, and with Trump now threatening our sort of prosperity, I think it really is a wake-up call. We've got to double down on what we're good at, and we've got to fix the things that are holding us back, and that's the regulatory systems, the tax mix and structure are two that we do have some control over, including here in BC.
Well, I agree with you. I believe that the resource sector is where we can see tremendous prosperity. Of course, we're emotional right now, and we want to buy Canadian. So I've been trying to buy Canadian. So I want to buy Canadian marmalade. Well, I can't get it in the grocery store because no marmalade manufacturer here can produce to scale that it goes into the system. So I've got to order it online. It takes time. There isn't the convenience. It costs more. And on and on and on it goes like that. Yes, we want to support Canadian manufacturers, but is that really the best place that we should be putting our efforts? Should we be getting more behind this kind of resource development? Jock, I see you wanting to jump in, and then I'll go to Robert.
Well, I mean, I don't think our whole future lies in resources. So the example you're citing about marmalade, I mean, the market will sort of sort that out over time. I don't think that's really a job for politicians and governments. And by the way, I think our priority, and people talk about trade diversification, as David will know well, these gravity models of international trade tell you very clearly that your most extensive trade connections are based on geographic proximity, right? Distance matters critically in trade. So there really isn't an alternative to the United States in broad terms for Canada. It's not like we can redirect $300 or $400 billion of exports away from the United States and sort of put them into Europe or Japan. That isn't going to work. We need to figure out, we need to sort things out with the United States in a way that preserves, to the extent possible, reasonably good market access to the U.S. That has to be. I mean, I think the federal decision makers are well aware of that. But resources will have a bigger role. You know, when I started working in Vancouver, BC, we had 77% of our exports came out of natural resource industries. Today, it's the same share. You know, I mean, and that sort of tells you those are the industries that we can actually produce stuff that the world wants to buy at a price we can afford to sell it. That's where our comparative advantage is most pronounced. So instead of pretending that isn't true, let's embrace it and be the best in the world at how we manage those industries and ensure kind of maximum benefit. And they're all Crown resources, by the way. The resources are actually owned by the people in the province because 94% of our land base is Crown land. So we have a multiple sort of set of interests that we can advance by being a sustainable but efficient and competitive resource-producing jurisdiction. And I think we should embrace that as a core to our vision.
Well, that's a nice way of turning the discussion from all negative to where can we go. Robert, from your perspective, where do we go to be able to seize the moment, as Dave McKay had pointed out? Because there really is a moment here. I think that there's an appetite within Canada to say, okay, we have to do things differently.
Right. And let's not like a crisis go to waste, right? And you know, I feel encouraged to see, and just like as an example, all the discussion now and clearly a consensus emerging about interprovincial trade and about trade barriers and eliminating them. It's something that's been talked about for decades and little, you know, steps forwards here and there, but never really having everybody sitting around the table and say, okay, let's do this. And we're starting to see this taking shape. Now, hopefully that momentum will continue, will get us over the finishing line. But this crisis really has, you know, forced Canadians and politicians to acknowledge that we need to maximize our own market. And there are some, you were talking about marmalade and trying to find a Canadian product, but it creates business opportunities, and it would be a real shame, and it is a real shame that there are interprovincial barriers in certain for certain goods or services that cannot really trade across Canada barrier free. So let's tackle this as quickly and as possible. Something that economists have been talking about for years, but there's a lot of inertia in this respect.
So, David, we've of course talked about natural resources, but we also do recognize that we have an intellectual and intelligence productivity class in Canada, and we see, particularly in British Columbia, the emergence of life sciences and tech. What role can they play in helping to turn sort of our economic fortunes?
Oh, I think they can play a big role. You know, we need a vibrant private sector. I mean, the people who work in the natural resource sector, you're attracting skilled workers, you're attracting people to our universities, and all of that is a healthy ecosystem to develop other things like a technology sector, life sciences sector, and so forth. Coming back to the importance of natural resources, if you looked at BC's export base and you thought about, okay, some of the industries that get a lot of attention, like film and TV, well, that's about 3% of our export base. Education, well, that's about another 3%, and so forth. And one other one that escapes my mind at the moment. But you only get about 9% if you add in professional services and you add in tourism, which get a lot of attention. You're only at 27% of our exports of goods and services. The rest is natural resource based, and then the gateway economy, and then manufacturing. That's 2/3 of our export base. That is what the rest of the world wants to buy from BC. That's a pretty big signal. Natural resources includes not just the upstream extraction or production, but also the downstream manufacturing. It includes utilities, includes pipelines, and these are the most productive sectors that we have in the economy. They are high productivity sectors. They generate a lot of income. They generate about 17% of GDP nationally, and they generate about 10% of all employment income in the whole economy. So they're really, really important, and that income then circulates through the rest of the economy into other industries like tech, like life sciences, and so forth. I think the real challenge that Donald Trump is presenting to us, and this is the lens that I would use if I was a policymaker in Victoria or Ottawa, is how does this policy that I'm considering affect the calculus around whether a company is going to want to base and build their operations in BC? I would run every policy going forward through that lens, whether they want to base and build their operations in BC vis-a-vis the United States. That's the challenge of our time. It's an existential challenge. We have been seeing for the past decade forestry companies relocate their operations to the United States, and the way it happens is that new investment is directed to their US operations. New hiring is directed to their US operations, and what they devote to BC or to Canada is just maintenance capital, just to keep the lights on, keep the mill running a bit longer. And then every so often you see the mill, they'll go down to one shift and now it's not viable anymore because you've got to cover the fixed costs, and then the mill closes and it just devastates a regional community. It's a step down in living standards for that regional community. That's the model that we're going to see across a wide range of industries as they consider relocating their operations to the US. So this really is a moment for Canada and to BC. So we need to recognise it, and we need to start to turn the corner.
For much of the past decade, there's been a tremendous focus on construction of real estate, and it's been a big driver in the economy. What role do you see it playing going forward? Jacques?
Construction, real estate it's sort of derived demand. So you need construction services, you need real estate services because you've got population growth or economic growth, which creates the need for more buildings or for real estate services, or you've got migration, and we've had a huge amount of population growth in BC in the past decade and in Canada, and that's driven a lot of the demand for housing and for real estate. And so those industries are not going to be able to make up for an economy where your traded goods and service industries are faltering. I mean, we really have to get back to the robustness of the traded industries, because without them, sectors like construction, real estate, retail services, for example, critically dependent on the health of the rest of the economy. So, but construction is big. I just did a paper recently, and it's almost 10% of British Columbia's gross domestic product. It's smaller in Alberta. I was doing a comparison. It's 7.4%. 250,000 people employed in the industry in BC, so it's an enormous part of our private sector. It's one of the big engines of the economy, but ultimately it will do well if the broader economy is performing well. If we have a slumping overall economy, then these sectors that depend on other sources of income, in a sense, coming into the province will suffer.
So I'm aware of our time. David's in hot demand. He's already given one presentation on this topic at one location, and he's on call to go to another one. So closing thoughts from each of you. David, let's start with you, seeing as I put you in the spotlight here.
Well, as I said, I think the key thing is how do we create a policy environment that makes it attractive for companies to want to base and build their operations here. That is the challenge. We can't afford to do what we've been doing over the past decade, which is relying on population growth, a credit boom, in the economy. None of these things lead towards productivity. Productivity is a market-driven process. It is companies competing with each other, companies displacing each other, going out of business, new ones coming in. That is a market-driven process, and you need a vibrant private sector economy. So when we're seeing the indicators that we're seeing, it should be a big wake-up call, and it should have been a wake-up call anyway. But I think now with Mr. Trump down south explicitly saying, hey, come and base your operations south of the 49th parallel, I think we do have to start having a good hard look at our policy environment.
Robert, you said don't let a good crisis go to waste. Your closing thoughts.
Right. It's exactly where I'm going again. I mean, and here's an opportunity now to move very fast on issues that have been there for a long time. So, the interprovincial trade barriers, for example, reducing red tape, getting things done. These are all under our own control in Canada. This is nothing that the Trump administration is imposing on us. So let's at the minimum, let's move forward with them. The situation, the trade war now could linger for a very long period of time. That uncertainty can persist for a long period of time. Let's I'm sure. But we'll do our best here to minimize the impact. But at the end of the day, let's control what we can control.
Jacques.
I would say the first thing is we need to shatter the sense of complacency that I think has really enveloped the country and certainly BC for a long period of time. It is not serving us well, and we do face, I think, virtually an existential threat, as David said. So let's get rid of the complacency. Second, we need major change, not incremental around the margins in the things we control. That's the tax structure and mix, the regulatory environment. Big bang policy change is, in my view, absolutely imperative. And the third is we need our elected officials, certainly in Ottawa and Victoria, to put the economy and building the foundations of a productive economy at the center of what they're doing, not just some file to be managed along with 10 others. That needs to be at the heart of the mandates, and that clearly has not been the case over the last 7 to 10 years. So we need a big pivot back to in my opinion, back to the economic fundamentals, and I hope we're going to get it. I'm not quite as confident as David that we're going to, but I think there's a chance.
Well, I believe that the discussion is starting to change from just purely being at the macro level. Oh yeah, we've got to make changes. We're going to address this permitting process. We're going to move in this direction. We're going to make it easier for businesses, which is all wonderful to say from the podium, but it's at the micro level where they get into the details and start to make those things really change that I think is where we'll see the difference. And maybe, I'm going to be hopeful here, that the mood is right in the province and in the country to start to be able to make some of those changes. I want to thank our panelists, Robert Hogue, joining us from Toronto from RBC, David Williams from the Business Council BC, and Jacques Finlayson from the Independent Contractors Business Association. Thank you very much for your time tonight. For our panelists, and Robert will send you one, you will get a coveted Conversations Live mug. We'll send it to you. David and Jacques, you've got a couple of them on the shelf. There's people who might be breaking into your house to steal them.
Canadian-made product, that's fine.
Oh. Printed at London Drugs. Printed at London Drugs. I couldn't choose where they sourced it from. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and look for us next week. We're doing a special event on Earth Day, 4/22, at 4:22 in the afternoon, where we're going to have 4 candidates or representatives from the different political parties addressing the issue of sustainable energy. Where are we at right now? Are we moving away from all the efforts that we put into sustainable energy, or are we going to remain committed to that and move towards a future that ensures that we're protecting the environment in a responsible manner? Thank you. Thank you for joining us online. Thank you for joining us in person. Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.